Anyway, I was trying to get to the meat of the matter here. I wanted to see the big segment. And the big segment was what came up next. Big, no pun intended there, Brian. I wanted to see what they were going to do with Shaquille O'Neal. And I had been led to believe by what has been on television previously said that there would be some kind of big whoop-de-doo, some kind of come to Jesus meeting, some kind of we're going to sit down here and shuck this ear of corn all the way down to the cob till we get things straight meeting between Shaq and Cody. But instead, we get Tony Schiavone and Shaq in a sit-down with Brandy Rhodes. In a sling, even. Her arm in a sling. Shaq sitting there like he had just recently had a cocktail with Bill Cosby. He was almost comatose.
Oh,
he couldn't have put any less energy in this. And he said he had to refer to, well, Brandy starts out being a heel, being snippy, right? And she's sitting there with her arm in a sling from that phony bullshit with old Jane Cargill. And they've actually, Shaq, he's had some passing affiliation with wrestling a couple of times in the past. Now, I guess he's watched it on TV, but he probably thinks, well, these are the wrestling people. They know what the fuck I'm supposed to be talking about. I'm sure they told him who this Jade Cargill was, right? Because he says, I'm not a fan of Jade, or no, I am a fan of Jade, but like he's a fan of, how can he be a fan of someone that no one has ever seen before? Because all the people watching the program are going, well, goddamn, we never seen her till 3 weeks ago. How can he be a fan of hers? He wants big things to happen for her.
I think from her being a college basketball player was my guess.
Then maybe he could have said that. But on this program, he said he's a fan of Jade, but he didn't appreciate what she did to Brandy's arm. And then, did you get the impression Shaq and Brandy started building Jade versus Brandy and not Shaq versus Cody? Did you get that?
There's a lot to say about this segment.
He actually even said he and Cody were just messing around on social media, but he felt bad about Brandy's arm, but blah, 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 but old Jane or Jade or whatever. Go ahead and you say anything you want to say about this segment, because I can't believe that they got this fucking guy to do this, and this is what they came up with.
You know, when Cody does interviews and he says that they don't believe in the old tropes of the past where you need a babyface or a heel, what I never realized was he was talking about his wife. Because she's back to being a heel.
Both. She's both.
She's back to being a heel because Shaq wasn't a heel at all. He was just a guy being asked to sit down and talk about someone he apparently knows. He didn't act like a heel. He did nothing to build up a match. Who knew that this whole thing really was to build up Jade, who apparently has not ever wrestled, who's in training right now, versus Brandy, who I think we could say, even if you are the biggest Brandy fan, you'll admit, she does not belong in the ring. She is not a wrestler. She tries, but I appreciate her desire. She's not a wrestler. She's also not a babyface, it turns out, even though she was a few weeks ago defending her husband, cutting the greatest promo of all time. She's back to being a woman that it's impossible to cheer for. She's being a heel in this sit-down with Shaq. She's hamming it up. He looks like he doesn't give a crap. Except at the end, when she throws the drink in his face, and then he gets comedic. And the camera, the last shot you see is his, like, selling of the water to the face.
And she called him an asshole.
This girl came out on TV and said, oh yeah, by the way, Cody, I have a man. His name is Shaq. And it led to this.
Yeah, and he's a giant. So let's recap. Cody Rhodes comes out on television on his wrestling program and is speaking when suddenly an unknown woman who we have never seen or heard of before or even got mentioned comes out and interrupts him and spends 5 minutes trying to get some shit out that nobody knew what the fuck she was talking about, and it was fucking rotten. And suddenly she mentioned Shaquille O'Neal's name and had some off-brand reason of why that Cody had considered himself a giant, but she knows a real giant. So now they're going to compare dick sizes. But here comes Brandy to chew out this unknown woman verbally. And goddamn, there it is. And then the next week on TV, this unknown woman is standing on Brandy's arm with a chair on it backstage, and a bunch of people are yelling, and now Brandy's got her arm in a sling. But then for the last week, it was never even mentioned, and Shaq wasn't mentioned that week. And then suddenly they announce on social media that Shaquille O'Neal will be on this program. And okay, yes, I understand it's a pandemic and he's a celebrity, and so it's a pre-tape rather than live in the ring or whatever. But my God, has there ever been a flatter use of a celebrity? Has there ever been a more inexplicable trail of incidents that don't go together to get to a point where now apparently they have come to the conclusion that Shaquille O'Neal is not going to do dick about anything. And Brandy's the one that has a problem. So they're having Shaquille O'Neal shed light on the Brandy and Jane Cargill rivalry. Now here, just off the top of my head, I've promoted a lot of things and I've promoted stuff with local celebrities. You don't do that this way. You don't do any of this way. Some people are going to say, well, maybe they didn't advertise Shaq because they didn't know that they had the date until a specific time. Then save it a fucking week. If it was taped anyway, nobody knows when you taped it. But if you didn't want to advertise it until you got it on tape it and then advertise it. Don't say 3 days ahead of time, oh, he's going to be on Wednesday night. Wait until you can promote it on your own television, etc. Secondly, if they didn't have this thing down pat to begin with, why did they fucking bandy Shaquille O'Neal's name about at first when Jade Cargill did it? And why was this contrived backstory put in? It could have been real simple. I remember, and this is one thing I've listened to Vince McMahon and Kevin Dunn quite a bit about. They used to love the Sports Center moment when they would get, whether it was Mike Tyson or whether it was some football player or Lawrence Taylor or a celeb, whatever, some athlete that they could get to do something, they'd talk about it's going to be on Sports Center. Kevin Dunn, I can't wait to see it on Sports Center. Because that was then doing what they wanted the professional athlete or the celebrity or whatever to do, open them up publicity in new areas, in new venues, in new ways, in front of a new audience. And it worked big time with Austin and Tyson. That made Sports Center. But what were they going to say on Sports Center? Oh, let's recap this, folks. Shaquille O'Neal and a professional wrestler's wife were mad at each other on Wednesday night on TNT because the professional wrestler's wife or the professional wrestler had an interaction with a friend of Shaquille's that no one has ever heard of, which led to the professional wrestler's wife cussing out Shaquille's friend, and now there's bad blood. What the fuck?
And to go back to the original angle, it's amazing to think all that happened. And it was actually, I know Brandy stole the show, but it was to build up to Jade versus Brandy. Cody's already doing another thing. He's already now doing whatever he's doing with Sting. By the way, this is the third time I could think of. Jake, Jade, and Sting. Cody comes out for his promo, and all of a sudden, 30 seconds into it, someone else hits the ring to take over the promo. Keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Well, and even besides the fact that apparently there's not going to be a Cody and Shaq match because they're already doing Cody with something else. Well, who knows? Who knows? But here's the thing. The way this shit gets on Sports Center and the way it crosses over to a new audience and the way that you get your mileage out of your celebrity is not by letting the celebrity play along in your world and become one of the boys and part of the scripted entertainment, but it's that rare interaction where you can have with a couple of guys that people might buy something about it and or at least not insult them because it's plausible. Shaquille O'Neal is a huge NBA legend, right? An NBA on TNT. And Shaq has a show on TBS and Shaq Life or on TNT or whatever. And he's on Inside NBA. And now the new wrestling company. Why didn't they? It doesn't need to be in the ring. This wasn't. Why didn't they just wait until they had worked something out for Shaquille O'Neal to appear in on a such and such date that they could at least get something on tape, and then concoct the story. And it could have been very simple. They're going to give awards to Shaquille O'Neal for his program on TNT and to AEW for his program, the TNT folks. They love awards in television. Shaquille's going to be there. Cody Rhodes, one of the EVPs, is going to be accepting for his promotion or his program. Maybe do one of those press conferences, socially distanced, but it's an announcement. It's an award ceremony. And they both, Shaquille and Cody, make their thank you speeches. And as is sometimes happens, Shaquille O'Neal is a guy who's outside wrestling, but he's an athlete, right? He might say something that rubs some of the wrestling people the wrong way, even though he's just trying to be in the spirit of the thing. Maybe he would say to Cody, hey, too bad I never got into wrestling. I could have give your old man the Shackalizer or something. And Cody, yeah, that'd have been cool. And maybe Cody could say something like, yeah, me and Dusty Rhodes, we'd have been with him as my sidekick. We'd have been America's team. And then Cody could say, wait a minute, you really think that my dad would have been your sidekick? Well, I didn't mean anything by it. I'm just playing around. No. You really think that if you'd have got into wrestling instead of basketball, that you would have been a bigger star than my dad? Hey, I'm not trying to knock your dad. I was just, no, it's okay. I see what you're saying, but let me tell you something. My dad took me to the Omni in Atlanta to see you play in the NBA when I was a kid, and the building wasn't full. I remember going to see my dad wrestle in the Omni, and that building was full, but you didn't fill it up. And maybe then Shaq could say, hey, I remember seeing your dad wrestle in the Omni. It didn't look like he filled it up. It looked like he ate it. And just getting a goddamn deal and then fucking point some fingers at each other. And there's your Sports Center moment. The flashes are going off. The wrestler stepping up to the giant basketball player. And then if you don't have a match afterwards, you ain't in any worse position as you were after this fucking four-finger stinker. And if you do have a match, it would be a legitimate starting point for it. And it's something that would play on a non-wrestling program because, hey, it's these two guys getting into a fucking beef. Leave the fucking amateur girl and the wives and girlfriends and this rest of this dramatic ha-ha out of it and just have two guys have an interaction. That's the same thing they did with Tyson and those guys. Does that make a little more sense? If you've got access to this guy and he's part of the TNT TBS family, even if he doesn't want to do a wrestling match, the people thought that as soon as they did that Shaq thing with old Jane Cargill 3 weeks ago, they started thinking they're going to see Cody against Shaq. Well, they'd still be thinking if they did what I said, but it would have been a more entertaining fucking way to get into it.
I agree with you to a point. The only thing is Cody would never do any of that because, I don't know if you know this, but he won't do anything if it centers around his dad. If you notice, no one's ever done an interview in AEW saying anything about Dusty.
The Rhodes family. He's the American Nightmare, which is a play on the American Dream. He just got his the rights to use his name in wrestling back from the Evil Empire.
Who has ever done a promo in AEW mentioning Dusty?
And you're talking to Shaquille O'Neal, who was one of the biggest basketball players in the world at a concurrent time where Dusty was still one of the biggest wrestlers in the world. You can't make a little exception?
Again, Cody's been in some pretty big feuds. Has anyone ever mentioned Dusty?
All right, I'm just saying. It would have been a little bit more intriguing than Jane Cargill and Brandy getting in a fucking fuss and Shaquille coming over to promote that fight, to me.
How many turns has Brandy done so far? I mean, I don't know if this technically is a turn.
She doesn't turn. She just, whatever side of the bed she wakes up on, either grumpy bitch or, a friendly executive. Or Butch Reed.